Where
I
did the
think
name
that
Snyk come from?
so Snyk's kind of very first origin was this notion of, hey, we're going to instrument applications, we'll sneak data out, and but we'll spell it with Y like the cool kids do, and so SNYK. And I Googled it to sort of see if there's like Google contention, if there's anything else called Snyk. And the first or second option was Urban Dictionary that said Snyk is short for so now you know. And that kind of clinched it. It's like, okay, fine. So now you know. Perfect. You are listening to The Secure Developer, where we speak to industry leaders and experts about the past, present, and future of DevSecOps and AI security. We aim to help you bring developers and security together to build secure applications while moving fast and having fun. This podcast is brought to you by Snyk. Snyk's developer security platform helps developers build secure applications without slowing down. Snyk makes it easy to find and fix vulnerabilities in code, open source dependencies, containers, and infrastructure as code, all while providing actionable security insights and administration capabilities. To learn more, visit snyk.io/TSD.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of The Secure Developer. I am super excited to be with you here today, especially because of the guest that we have joining us today, and that is the founder of Snyk, Guy Podjarny. Guy is here with us. Guy, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks, Danny. It's fun and sort of a little bit odd to sort of be the guest on the podcast. I've done close to these a little bit with sort of Simon interviewing me in the end of years, but this was a bit different.
Yeah, I've been an audio listener of your podcast now 100 times, and so it's odd for me being on the other side and interviewing you. But of course, we wanted to do an official podcast where we covered the history of Snyk and the market and the evolution of all of that. And so I thought, what better way to go through this transition than to have you on and talk about the inception of Snyk? So if we bring it right back to the very beginning, I guess if I can start with a question, where did the idea of Snyk come from and when did it actually originate?
To an extent, the idea of Snyk came to me in the shower, but that's a bit of a misnomer. In practice, I think Snyk is very much kind of the culmination of my journeys ahead of that. So, as you know, I've spent a decade or so in sort of the world of AppSec, through companies we were, some of which were together, Danny and sort of Sanctum and then Watchfire and then IBM, and, kind of, I guess, saw the importance of sort of shift left, which we were saying, all the way back in 2002, and getting security kind of embedded earlier in the journey, and also seeing kind of the failure of that, or like how much maybe the importance of it kept growing, but the adoption of that was nowhere near kind of that same pace. And from there, I left security and I founded a web performance company in the not yet existent DevOps space on it that made websites faster. And I was a part of the Velocity conference, like a programming committee there, where like a lot of the initial DevOps talks came about, and kind of got a first row seat into this sort of rise of DevOps and like a new practice that says, okay, this software development will work differently, from here on. And here are a bunch of tools that are disrupting the traditional kind of enterprise tools, and the developers are embracing them, New Relic and subsequently Datadog and Heroku and a bunch of its sort of strengths in the cloud. So Snyk is very much, after concluding, Blaze, that startup got acquired by Akamai, and I was CTO at Akamai for a bunch of years. So after those sort of 6-ish years in the world of DevOps and cloud, I was ready to start another thing. And Snyk was really around bringing those two together. So it's like, can I bring what I've learned in the world of DevOps to security to kind of help, break the barrier, I guess, into getting it embraced? I will say that we can talk a little bit about the zigs and zags, but Snyk's original idea, the idea that came to me in the shower, that I sort of started it, and the name of the company was initially founded on, was actually more of a runtime instrumentation idea. The idea was to sort of, be developer, like build a developer tooling company that tackled security, all of that sort of remained or was there at the beginning. But the idea was, hey, we will instrument applications like New Relic or like Datadog, and we will sneak data out, and we will kind of see what happens inside in a low effort way for developers, and then we'll sort of protect them automatically. And the open source security product was a way to get initial market reach, and has kind of evolved from there.
Well, that's fantastic. I want to come back to the name because I know that there's a meaning behind the name, but on the point of bringing those two things together, the two things being developer security and runtime. Were you imagining that Snyk would focus solely on modern applications and not the legacy applications? When I say legacy applications, I'm thinking now you can go all the way back to COBOL, but C and C++. Were you really envisioning that this would be around modernizing modern applications only?
I think I had a tendency to think about the cloud a lot as a core concept. And so, first of all, I wasn't smart enough to really think that far out. I thought developer security has to happen. And I was more focused on the future, more focused on this is the way applications will be built. And, we should be the security solution for that future way in which applications need to be built. So I think I was initially focused on modern applications, modern development practices. Even early on, sort of said that in terms of go-to-market, we would sort of follow DevOps. And so where DevOps was adopted, there's more likelihood that Snyk will be adopted. So I guess the answer is yes. I think a lot of the practices in terms of the tech stack and things like that, a lot of what was good about DevOps has actually sort of slightly inched backwards in performance. I don't know if there's CI/CD systems for COBOL, but definitely, slightly more middle of the road or of the era applications. There's definitely a lot more sort of C++ applications that can get continuously deployed, that are deployed on sort of microservices. So maybe there's a little bit of that could have still applied in the original thesis. I think once we've sort of expanded into embracing the developer methodology and going out of the runtime angle, then it really became anybody that uses open source. And that goes a fair bit back. Again, not entirely sure about COBOL, but that was more the SAST journey, which we can get to.
Yeah. Well, let's touch on the name then before we get into open source. So Snyk, I think a lot of our listeners may know what it stands for, but let's hear it from the founder himself. Where did the name Snyk come from?
So Snyk's kind of very first origin was this notion of, hey, we're going to instrument applications. We'll sneak data out, and but we'll spell it with Y like the cool kids do. And so SNYK. And I Googled it to sort of see if there's Google contention, if there's anything else called Snyk. And the first or second option was Urban Dictionary that said Snyk is short for So Now You Know. And that kind of clinched it. It's like, okay, fine. So now you know. Perfect. And that was it. Interestingly, later on, I heard about other analogies like sneaked is the name that like a lock sneaks when the bolt goes into place. So that was interesting. And sneaked is the Wolverine, like the sound that the sort of when the blades come out. So there were all those, but So Now You Know was really the, and in fact, we had magic at the beginning of Snyk. We created these magic wands, these tinfoil papers thing that kind of pop up into a magic wand. And they said Snyk on the outside. And when you open them, it said, So Now You Know on them. So we very much leaned into that.
Well, I love the name, although I have to say, sometimes people don't know how to pronounce it because it is a challenging name, but
for a good while, actually, it was our second top support question was, how do you pronounce the company name? And this is a fun story. At the beginning of Snyk, I think we launched Snyk at Velocity Amsterdam in end of October of 2015. And there was a great guy from Austria there who was there and loved the idea. And he actually put together, this guy worked at Dynatrace, and he put together this video that talked about Snyk. And we were super early. We were really kind of grateful for, him kind of getting it out there on some sort of social sharing thing. And throughout the video, he says Snook. And we learned over the years that sort of the Austrian, the German accent lends itself to sort of pronouncing it as Snook. And he just sort of goes through and was debating, do we just sort of enjoy the reach, or do we kind of correct it? And we just sort of let it sort of run. And pronunciation was harder than I anticipated. No publicity is bad publicity. So it sparked conversations. It was probably good in the long run.
Well, it gets people talking about you. Exactly. I know my parents, when they first heard about it, they call it Snyk, but we've leaned into it with sneakers and sneak peek of what's coming next. So brilliant name. So you started on the open source side, and that has to be a market evolution. If I go back 20 years, most software, when you're writing software, it was top to bottom, or at least 90% of the software you wrote. I presume, and I guess I'm looking for confirmation, that part of the thought process of moving to or starting with open source is because a lot of the market has shifted towards open source components over the years. Is that a correct assumption?
Yeah, I mean, I think there was like a chain of decisions here. So the first one is that we modeled Snyk to be a developer tooling company that tackles security. And so our role models, when we thought about go-to-market, we thought about, how do you reach developers? Were very much, the New Relics of the world, again, sort of Roku. And those were very product-led growth. That term didn't exist, but, in practice, they were bottom-up players. And so that was a key requirement, right? The thesis, which I still stand behind, was that if you want to get developers to embrace security, you have to make it easy. And a part of that ease is to give them something that they can use and fall in love with. So that was one part of it. And so it needed to be, that was also a part of the choice of securing kind of open source libraries, is that a developer can do it. When you think about, for instance, the barrier to introducing a runtime agent, that's like a higher friction piece. And we understood that. And so we said, we're going to start with something lighter. Open source security at the time was an interesting domain because, it wasn't well covered. Like the only player really around was Black Duck. Nobody liked it. Nobody likes it today either, but there weren't any fans. There were just no real alternatives. And so felt like a space we could do. And indeed, we could take an approach that was very, okay, if you're using, once again, sort of the modern lens, then you're installing dependencies, through NPM, through these libraries. Can we kind of help you make it easy for you to know if any of them is vulnerable? And so really the driver was, can we find something that is truly valuable, that is a bit of a window in the markets to sort of get initial adoption, and that enables this sort of bottom-up motion? And we underestimated, I think I've kind of learned to appreciate now that like any problem worth doing, is probably bigger and, more complex, than you think. And so I think we knew that it's a valuable thing to do. It was easy to pitch why you should do it. We knew practically nobody was doing it. And we knew the world of NPM, especially, which is where we started, was suffering from like dependency explosion and having, like people were afraid of dependencies, and they still are. Like it is a hard to wrangle domain, but we didn't appreciate how complicated it is. And so in the initial deck, it says 3 months, we're going to do open source security for NPM. And then after 3 months, we'll do it for Java. And then after 6 months, we'll get to our real product in runtime. And 3 years later, I think we launched our second product and it wasn't in runtime. So it was definitely more complicated. But I think in hindsight, that gap in the market was kind of well timed. It was an important problem that was growing in importance and was underserved in terms of solutions, especially for the modern developer.
And when you say developer first, Guy Po, do you immediately jump to the IDE, or when you make that statement, was it more just I want to reduce the cognitive load on development, however that might be? I guess I'm wondering if that is a tool specific statement or a cultural approach statement.
Yeah, it definitely is bigger than the tool. So the lens to sort of look through is, what if you only cared about developers adopting your tool? If you really didn't care about anything else, what would you do? And that's kind of the tunnel vision that we adopted. It says like, we want developers to embrace this product. We think the tools today are not fit for purpose for developers. They're built for auditors. They're not built for developers. And so what is built for developers? Which tools do developers love? And which companies do developers love? And we kind of set out to really mimic and kind of build on these role models that were the dev tooling companies that we most loved. And that manifested throughout the company, like we, in the color scheme of the website, in the choice of the logo, that's sort of behind you and it's hiding here behind me, in the go-to-market motion, in the choice of the product sensibilities. And so we built a command line interface. The original product was only a command line interface, and we put a lot of effort into the developer experience of that CLI. But also just like the language, everything around it. And also the people that we hired, like the people that I hired at the beginning, I very much sort of focused on people that have, UX focus, that have, developer experience. And I think one of the things that really worked out well for us, which were sort of semi-intentional, was we combined some sort of talent and competency in security that came mostly from sort of Israel and the Tel Aviv office with competencies around communities and sort of developer love and developer reach that came a lot more from the kind of UK center. And our R&D, our development was sort of really in both of those domains. So yeah, I think a lot there. Probably like the most memorable example of that was the color scheme. And so we wanted a warm everything. All the security companies were like blue corporate, or maybe black and red. And we wanted something that's like, developer friendly and all that. We wanted warm color palettes and a lot of conversations about that. But when they tell you have a sort of critical vulnerability, I do want to scare you just a little bit. Like, you do need to be like mindful that this is important. So we had all these deep conversations about it. We landed on this magenta color for sort of a high severity issue. Even purple, for those who don't know it, it was very much like at the time was the rise of the purple team, which is like the blue team and the red team. So the attackers and the defenders working together, hence the sort of the purple. So a lot of thought as to like, how does it represent, how does it go? And, we went through, like, we didn't go to security conferences for 2 years, probably. We went only to dev conferences. So much so that I think about something like a year into the company, I was having some advisory comment with some go-to-market, with some demand gen marketing person at Heavybit. Sort of, we were part of that program. And he asked me, say, if a security person gets to the website, how do they register? And I was like, that's a good question. If they have a GitHub account, they can log in with GitHub. And then we added a Google account, which pretty quickly became like half our registrations. So yeah, we were very tunnel visioned on what would make developers use this.
Well, I love that story of the blend. And I think that's represented now. You talk about brand and marketing, even in the dog. I think of Dobermans, which is the symbol. You mentioned it's behind us here. Dobermans are kind of scary dogs, but when you look at the Doberman patch, the dog for Snyk, he's a bit of a blend. He's not totally scary, but he's also not totally friendly either.
Yeah, that was another obsession. If you want to do this as an exercise at home, you can flip the eyes. Like the eyes, the semicircles, like it really try to walk the line. If you flip the eyes and you kind of have that semicircle be the other way around, it gets too friendly. It really was like just at the edge of like at some point you either want to go and pet the dog or you want to keep your distance. And yeah, there was a lot of emphasis on that. So yeah, we definitely sweat the details, and I think it paid dividends. It is as conveying that we're not just another security.
So that's technology and marketing and brand. And I totally see that. What about culture? What was important to you as you were starting the company on culture? Talk to me about transparency and how you believed the company should evolve from the inception in going towards a developer market.
Yeah, I think a lot of it really comes down to sort of mimicking the sort of, GitHub, New Relic, others of the world at the time. And so invested a ton in community. We started this podcast as a security developer to share practices on the belief that in the world of DevOps, a lot of the breakthroughs happened because people were willing to talk about failure, to get up on stage and talk about how this didn't work, that didn't work. And they had a sharing platform. Realized in security, there wasn't really much of a place for defenders to come and talk about, what they've done and what their learnings were and all that. And so that was a build up. Everything was very transparent. In fact, it's interesting that sometimes the philosophy preceded or sort of, was stronger than the product sensibility. So like our vulnerability database at the beginning was on a GitHub repository, just out of the premise of we're just transparent here. It's in GitHub. It took us a while to realize that that's not at all useful to users. It's only useful to competitors. So stop doing that. But even till today, the advisories and the sort of the capabilities are public. And I think probably the single biggest example of that is the fact that the product is free for open source. And I think today that maybe feels like a given to people, but it wasn't at all at the time. And it was definitely not in security. And so the fact that Snyk was from the beginning free for open source maintainers, for open source projects to use was very, very big. It was very important to us philosophically. It was so important that when we created a commercial team, like the company was so oriented at like serving the developer and serving the community that we had to create a carved out team called Enterprise. That was the first team created on it. It says like some people also care about who pays. And of course, over time, as the company grew, it became balanced. Now we have a developer experience and application experience team, we sort of evolved over the years, but sort of an AppSec experience and developer experience. But yeah, it was very, very, very focused. I do think like when you found, this is a bit more of an entrepreneurship tip, but I think when you're a founder, you have to be careful from the word end. When you want to do this and this, you have to pause. There are cases in which you have to do this and this, but I think you really have to be amazing at something to break through. And if you're just okay at everything, nobody cares. And so for us, the passionate focus on developers and everything around that community works. We even went as far at some point as acquiring a conference. We acquired DevSecCon at the time, which was like, can you acquire a conference? Like, turns out you kind of can, sort of. And, who have done a great job, Francois, they did a great job sort of building up that event as a center for sharing security experiences and such. And we helped amplify it. So yeah, very, very passionate on community. I think everything else, the transparency, the color scheme and all that, they're all side effects of focusing on what would make a developer discover you, love you, want to use your product, and successful in using your product.
So if I play that back to you, and I completely agree with what you've said, what I'm hearing is it was really focused on developer first as the core premise. Secondarily, that we would have this blend of helping the industry, red and blue team, and giving technologies that aided them. But lastly, very much a culture of transparency. I've always believed that great companies, long-term generational companies, are built on a solid foundation. They may expand beyond that, and clearly Snyk has expanded beyond that. But is that a fair summation of what the foundations of Snyk are, on which the organization was built?
I think they are, and I think they're also like core to how we build kind of the product and the ethos and sort of everything around the company culture. I do think that it's the addition of the business was an important addition. It sort of highlighted probably the biggest sort of push and pull that happens within the company even till today, when I think in the market, between depth and breadth. So maybe, and I'm slightly kind of going a bit to the next chapter, but I think it's what you've described was correct. But this next one really cemented, how we have to operate today and how we are today, which is the addition of the needs of security. And so we have like Snyk's, everybody describes, like everybody remembers as the overnight success. That was not the case with Snyk. We were actually pretty good because of the focus on a few good decisions. We were pretty good at developer adoption all along. And we had the best developer adoption that any security tool has seen, which was really quite mediocre for developer tools at large. And at the same time, we had no revenue. We had for 2 years in, we had probably spent maybe $4 or $5 million, and we had about 100,000 in annual recurring revenue in ARR. If you're not familiar with startups, that is not good. That is not, and it's not
good,
intentional.
Good to have funding.
yeah, exactly. And we had a few near-death experiences on the funding route. And I think the key unlock that has happened through the second year and then eventually kind of manifested about 2 years in was really the understanding that developers like depth and security needs breadth. It's like if I'm a developer, and I've said this sentence, I think, many times, although curiously, I might not have had a chance to say it on this podcast, which is, if I'm a PHP developer, I couldn't care less if you support JavaScript or not. It's like, and it's not because I'm narrow-minded. It's just like, it doesn't affect my day-to-day. Similarly, if I develop on AWS, I don't care if you support, Google Cloud or Azure. I care about my stack, and it better be amazing. That's the bar I'm used to. That's the way, I love my sort of purpose-built tools for my ecosystem. And so you really have to be deep to win over developers. But security is already a massively fragmented space, and it already is very, very hard to keep up with all the different threats. And it's just impractical for a security team to have, 5 different directors of engineering in their company use 5 different tools for, say, open source governance. It's not a lack of willingness to adopt sort of agility and things like that. It's just not practical for them to do so. And so they need breadth. They need you to support 80, 90% at least of sort of the applications in their stack and cover a threat. Otherwise, it just might not be usable for them. They might love the tool, but it's not practical for them to use it. And so this combination of depth and breadth is effectively impossible. Like, you can't have something that is fully deep and fully broad, but it is the balance that we have to strike. We can talk a little bit about SAST and how, that was kind of broken through and how that works there. But I think that realization was super, super important. And I think partly by chance, partly, by intention, open source security was a domain in which it was reasonable to manage to provide both depth in the ecosystems that we supported and breadth, and therefore kind of cross that sort of, it's not quite the chasm, but sort of, cross that sort of line to be able to provide a solution that both developers love and that security, loves and is able to kind of use to actually secure their organization. And I think that became another pillar of Snyk. It became a pillar of the culture. It was hard to embed because we had security competency, passion, but we did not have enough security person empathy, passion in the company. Well, that's, 6 years ago. And today, it's equal, if not like even more sort of security practitioner empathy in the company. But we had to do that. We had, for us to sort of become the longer term. So I would say sort of 3 years in, the company was had both of it, and that became the core DNA for which we grew.
Yeah, well, you clearly see that breadth and depth now. I mean, a CEO or a leader of an AppSec program is not interested in the CLI command line capability. They're interested in the dashboards and the measurement and metrics over time. But it feels like you've struck the right balance, certainly in the evolution in where we are today. I'm interested to move forward in the both market evolution and technology evolution. Maybe we'll start with market evolution over the last 8 years, because it's really been 8 years to date. How has the market evolved, or has it evolved? Maybe is a better question.
I think it evolved a lot. I think, first of all, it evolved in acceptance of developer security as the solution that is needed. It transitioned, sort of feels like somewhere around sort of 4 years ago or so, was really a bit of a tipping point to go from should I do this to how do I do this? I think it goes hand in hand with the acceptance and a little bit of mileage with DevOps. I think a lot of organizations might have already chosen DevOps and cloud, but they've not experienced it yet. So they haven't really internalized how the speed of software development that those technologies bring make your existing AppSec program just pointless. Like if you're not embedding it into development, you're just not going to keep up. So enough people had to feel the pain. But at the beginning of Snyk, we had a lot of conversations. I had quite a few conversations in which either people were saying, yeah, that's great, but we're not ready for it. Or they were saying, we don't trust developers. Like, yeah, that's all nice. But as in the security team was saying, they're never going to do the right thing on it. And I think at around that, roughly that point in time, the percentage, clearly there were always the sort of the brilliant, those sort of amazing security leaders that sort of helped us also kind of build up the company that were at the forefront, many of whom I had the chance to interview on this podcast, but also like some majority tipped and people started saying, okay, I know I need to do this, but it is hard. How do I change the culture? How do I get people to embed it? Help me out here, right? Help me figure it out. And so I think that's a big change. Applying it further, I think there was an understanding of a slightly more meta change, which is software is eating the world, and that an increased transition that frankly goes all the way back, Danny, to like our AppScan days, sort of back then, from that sort of network security or infrastructure security into application security, and how more and more decisions are being made at the application security side are important, and therefore how you should just put more weight onto application security as a whole. So that's, I think that specifically is probably something that has really only landed in the last couple of years.
It definitely is the case that customers are asking more for guidance in this, which is kind of surprising to me. It's been 25 years now that we've been, and more since we've been doing application security, but it's surprising to me how many organizations don't have an opinionated perspective of how they should move forward and how it can help. Tell me how the technology evolved. So clearly you started in the open source side of this, and over the years, over the last 5 years, I think there's been 9 different acquisitions. But talk to me about how the evolution of both building and buying technology drove Snyk forward to where it is today.
First of all, we came to the kind of understanding that you don't really want, if you have like a bunch of files in your repository and you're a developer, you're thinking about all of them as representing your application. So even from a dev lens, you don't want like 5 different tools securing this file in your repo and this file in your repo and this file in your repo. And so that realization drove us to start building new products, maybe a little bit earlier than typical sort of startup conviction. And so we built a container security product and saying you have your Docker file in your repo. And it might be vulnerable. And it's also dependencies. Can we help you with that? We built an infrastructure as code product. And both of those did quite well. Infrastructure as code, interestingly, has not deepened into application developers quite as much as I would have thought, but containers are very embedded into it. And infrastructure as code was a good segue later on into cloud, which we'll get to. So I think that was like the first phase maybe at understanding that, and went very well. Like it was well received. It was really us following the customers saying, can you also do this for me? Can you also do this in a dev first security fashion? And we built it just as a startup sort of lens on it. We always built it in a very iterative, like one of our principles at Snyk is ship it. Just like, let's iterate. Let's not sort of presume we know better than the world. Let's sort of ship a thing and then evolve it. And so we shipped add-ons that had a little bit of functionality that was useful, and expanded them until they could be a product that could stand on its own 2 feet. The one area where we couldn't do that was SAST. So static analysis, I guess for the listeners, Danny and I both I had the dubious experience of sort of, leading static analysis product, back in sort of IBM days. And I guess when I started Snyk, I swore off not doing this. Snyk will not have a static product. It is, to do so, we would have to invent new math. At some point realized, okay, look, we have to have a static analysis product. Like there has to be, as part of that same thesis is you also have your source code files in that, and they interplay with the others. And so we have to have a static analysis product. And we looked at all the companies in the market, and basically none of them looked good to us. We even set out starting to build a static analysis product, which was an unpleasant experience. And while doing that and understanding our needs, we came across Deepcode, which was a company that was not doing security, but they were taking this sort of very novel approach to static analysis that basically treated code as data. So just sort of encoded code into data. I'm massively oversimplifying here, and then used AI to kind of understand the massive volumes of code in the world and understand patterns like an expert developers would. And, by basically encoding all of that world's code into data and learning on it, and by encoding your code as data and then intersecting that with that sort of knowledge we have from the world, it was able to do maybe sort of three important things. One is scan code very, very quickly, which is mandatory for developer experience. And a lot of static analysis tools fall because it could basically benefit from all the sort of the data analysis advancements of the world. Two is it can do that in a way that is increasingly accurate because it could learn, like we're saying, the benefits of AI today. So this is machine learning days. And so it's good, but also more importantly, it keeps getting better versus rules that have to always be manually tuned. This is based on data, which is almost guaranteed to always get better. And then the third, which was critical for our depth versus breadth element, is that the way it works, that it normalized the code. It works today. It normalizes the code into data as it transfers it into data. And so it works. There's some platform specific content for every kind of platform, but for the most part, far more so than our open source work, which was just sort of, I guess, at a level of complexity that was reasonable to do it on language by language, could be done at bulk. To complete that story, we acquired Deepcode. I think it was a great partnership. I think they brought amazing depth in sort of that program analysis. I think we brought in, great sort of product chops and our sort of real great security depth on it. And together we built Snyk Code, which was like a phenomenal success from a Snyk perspective. And I think a real kind of change kind of maker in the industry. And then I guess kind of the last phase maybe that I would mention is the whole world of cloud. And so I think the next step of appreciation that I think is still forming is this notion of context and the fact that you're never going to fix all the bugs. And, you have, a lot of code, and now we almost like caused a problem because now we can very effectively find all of these bugs, all of these security bugs, but you're never going to fix all of them. And so over the last few years, the kind of rallying cry was prioritization. It's like, can you help me figure out which of these I should care about more, which makes sense. And I think for that, you need context. So some of that context comes from analysis. Let me better analyze the code and libraries and how they interact. But a lot of it comes from context, like what has been deployed to the cloud? What is accessible to the internet? Which of these can an attacker truly kind of hack versus this thing that is like behind a firewall in my developer environment, and it needs to be some compromised internal kind of employee that is highly permissioned to even run the attack on this vulnerability. And so I think the next era really comes from this notion of cloud. And we've had a bunch of experiments over here. We acquired Fugue, which we learned a ton from, didn't quite pan out precisely as we had expected. Also happened right in the midst of a financial kind of market correction that helped us kind of refocus a lot more on sort of AppSec versus that. But I think that is a next evolution into this world of application security posture management and ASPM. I'm sure we'll sort of talk about AI, which is probably kind of the next evolution on it. But I think just sort of getting to today is this notion of like looking at things holistically as a context, looking at all the codes together, looking at all of its journey, looking at all of its context and where it's been deployed and how does it change, so that you can look at the million things that you have to fix, that you could fix, and find the 100 of them that you really have to fix to really make a big dent in your security posture. So, and there's a bit of that's the journey.
So you've brought it back to the part where Snyk started, which is you're sneaking data out of the runtime in order to prioritize what it is that needs to
That's actually very fulfilling. Like with the Helios acquisition now, sort of adding a runtime agent to Snyk is a very kind of closed loop moment.
Yeah. Well, it's fantastic to see it come full circle in that way. And I agree that runtime is what drives customers to understand what needs to be fixed first. I actually have a question on that. I just posted about this on LinkedIn. One of the challenges that I see around CNAP and using runtime to drive fixes is that it only covers those areas that you can collect that runtime environment. Do you expect that is just likely to always be the case, or that the world's going to shift towards cloud-centric environments where you do get that runtime? Do you think it's going to continue to be hybrid? I guess I'm curious how you see the evolution of this moving forward.
I think static analysis would always be easier than runtime analysis or dynamic analysis by the sheer virtue that it doesn't need a running application. Like, no matter how fast or sort of fancy you are, it's still faster to sort of contemplate all the possible ways in which a program might behave by looking at it statically than it is to actually get the application to perform all these random settings. And so, for instance, runtime behavior, yes, there probably will be, and I think we're already seeing it with OpenTelemetry, with eBPF, like increasing technologies that make it easier to say, let me just sort of look at the application as it's running and capture everything that it does. And I think that is mightily valuable. However, security is all about the unexpected behaviors. It's not about what it does when it is behaving as it should. It's about what happens if I put a single quote over here. How does the application behave then? And so I think in terms of modeling the application, I do think runtime will get easier and easier. I would sort of bet static analysis would still be easier, but in practice, we really want to combine the whole picture. But in terms of figuring out what is possible, I think static analysis would always have better coverage. And to a degree, runtime assessment would always have slightly better accuracy because it's sort of seen the thing happen. And so I do believe that the eventual holistic kind of, perfect solution is the one that combines everything together. But that if you really have to choose what would tell you about all the problems, then static analysis would be your go-to, with runtime and those observations becoming ways to sharpen the picture and to indeed prioritize or just better understand an issue.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because I actually agree with you. I think the foundation is the open source and static analysis, where the runtime and the cloud signals and things are signals. They augment it to help you get better around the core, because you're always going to have open source. You're always going to have code. You may or may not have containers and IAC and runtime sensors that can feed you that data, but it definitely makes you smarter.
Yeah. And it's a bit akin to like misconfigurations and XDR, right? You can look at all the misconfigurations, and some of them are not that important, some are more, but your sort of XDR and runtime detection, I think you need to be, not entirely sane to sort of say, I don't need to scan for misconfigurations because my sort of XDR setup is good enough that I'll catch the attackers when they try to do it. Like, I think you just need both. You need the static analysis, but the static analysis is the one that gives you breadth.
Well, it's about the right to win. And the reason I think about this an awful lot is because, you have people on the right who are doing cloud security posture management over on the runtime and operation side versus dev first application security posture management, which we are very focused on. Which one do I think has more value? And I think you and I are biased on this, but I think the dev first ASPM is far better and more important, more strategic in the long run than the cloud security posture management, simply because you can trace it back to where it all started, and you can do that every time, as opposed to just the cloud scenarios or the container scenarios in the modern development environments.
One thing we've somehow managed to kind of get to this phase and not talk about, and that's kind of my mission, is remediation. And I think actually a core learning, maybe, as like a key sentence that we would say again and again at the beginning, and we were still saying today, is a developer's job isn't to find issues, it's to fix issues. Right? If all I do is like tell you about problems and I don't help you fix them, like at some point you're not going to like me very much, and you would rather not hear me, which is an experience a lot of security people feel. And so Snyk, from the very beginning, from the sort of crappy command line interface that we sort of shipped back in that sort of October 31st, I think, or 30th, 2015, it had a fix option. It ran Snyk Wizard, and you would run through it and it would upgrade to make the problems go away. And then the fix PRs in GitHub. And I think fix remains a core premise throughout. Now we have these exciting kind of AI fixes in SAST and sort of in Snyk code to actually fix your code. And I think this notion of remediation is super important. It's important for developer adoption, but also like fundamentally, it's also true for security people. You don't really get paid to know about the issues. It's easy because that's the way that your job manifests, is like make you aware of the sort of the risk. But in practice, the security organization's purpose is to make the organization more secure. And that requires fixing issues wherever you can. So making fixing easy is really the true end goal. And it's hard for me to think of anything that is kind of not patchy, that is long-term viable when it comes to fixing, than actually going to the root of where the problem was and fixing that. And so I really think that you can debate a little bit interim solutions and am I willing to sacrifice coverage for just sort of finding a few issues that I think are clearly issues I should fix. But if you want the fix to actually be automated, if you want something that actually has, the chance of giving you long-term protection, you have to go to the core. You can't take those shortcuts.
Yeah, focus on the fix has certainly been a huge foundational component of Snyk since the very beginning. I have two questions for you on that. A, have you been in a self-driving car? And B, do you think we'll ever get to self-fixing code? In other words, will we get true autonomous developer security where they never even look at this, just fixes it as part of the process?
Yeah. I mean, I'm certain we will. I'm certain we will. Clearly we sort of aim to be part of that. But it's kind of hard to see why you wouldn't. And so, just sort of trace the logic here a little bit. Like, will AI improve to understand vulnerabilities and fix vulnerabilities automatically? Yes. I mean, I think that's an absolute yes. Once that is improved, why wouldn't you go through all of your code and fix all the vulnerabilities that you have there? Why wouldn't you sort of make that type of change automatic versus be something that is attended? And I think it really is just about, when do we build enough confidence to kind of have this move from attended to autonomous? But I think it's a when, not if. And as we talked about, with the depth versus breadth, it probably wouldn't come uniformly to every practice, every stack. Ironically, this might actually benefit the stacks that change a little bit more slowly, but I think it's an absolute destination that we have to pursue. Also, that it's the only way to kind of keep ourselves secure, because AI will just sort of make software development even faster. And if you're going to be relying on AI to generate code, you have to rely on AI to generate fixes for vulnerabilities that are created.
Yeah, I look back at Log4j, and wouldn't it have been great to be able to say, go fix all the Log4j issues that exist out there, and it just autonomously goes and finds them all and corrects them and updates them and patches them. And I do think we will get there. It's amazing that we've got this far through the podcast and we haven't talked about AI, but I do think that AI is going to radically shift the industry, continue to shift the industry is maybe a better way of putting it, because we've been using AI within Snyk, within the static analysis and platform itself for the last 5 years.
Yeah, I think AI, you asked me about the market evolution, and I think AI and sort of AI trust is the natural kind of continuation of it that is starting to happen. And so I think the reality is that, AI is becoming part of software development. It will be more and more so. Like, AI will handle more implementation over time. And already today in many organizations, Copilot or the likes, write the majority of the code. That code is definitely not perfect. Generally, it tends to be less secure than developer code. But I think even if you disagree with that comment, like, it is frequently able to have vulnerabilities in it. So like, you have to have something, like, if you rely on automation, you have to rely on sort of automated assessment on it. And so a lot of kind of the next chapter when it talks to application security is not about whether you can trust the developers and how do you kind of equip that, but rather whether you can trust AI. And just like with developers, it's not a belief question. It's not a faith question. It's a controls question. It's, like, what is it that you have in place to help you have that trust, that conviction that helps you tell your boss and, the board, yes, we are protected and we're able to do that. And so I think this notion of AI trust is critical. And I think for the foreseeable future, the code that AI writes and the code that developers write will be intermixed. And so really, for me, it's really about the sort of combined dev and AI trust sort of platform that you need to be able to be secure in the sort of the AI era and to keep up with that pace. And so for me, that's absolutely sort of the iteration and the evolution. And it's, exciting and frightening, but it's unavoidable, right? I don't think you can't say, I'm just not going to use AI. And I was about to say, like, any more than you could say, I'm not going to use the cloud. With AI, that gap maybe is even bigger. You even, are less able to say that than cloud.
Yeah, that's definitely true. There's organizations now that are pulling back from cloud or maybe not using cloud, but every single organization without exception will be using AI in some way. And every single person, I would argue, is going to use AI. I think the shift that will come is this year it was all about AI. At RSA 2024, it was all about AI. I think RSA 2025 is going to be about governance and trust probably more than AI itself.
I think,
and that's exciting. I think we're at an exciting reflection. Looking back on the Snyk history, two more questions, if I may. I know we're running out of time here. What do you wish you had known at the beginning that you know now? Like, would you have done anything differently over the Snyk evolution and history of the last 8 years?
I mean, I often wonder about that question. And I think it's very hard to know what would have happened had you known more of the answers up front. Like, had I known about this need for security for breadth, would we have veered off this sort of tunnel vision for security for sort of developers earlier on? And if so, would that have actually not given us the sort of foundation and the strength and the developer path that we had before? I mean, that's a very likely scenario had I known it a bit more, right? I think a lot of the things that I do wish I had known have to do more with sort of organizationally, like the rate of growth during the highs of 2021, and then the sort of the need to kind of right size in 2022 was very painful. All sorts of learning around people. I think the market evolution, you have to have a thesis about where it's headed. You have to anchor in the future. And then really the true strength is not in figuring out the perfect path towards that destination, but rather with having the power to zig and zag on the way to it. So a bunch of these zigs and zags were like incorrect, and they some of them were paying the price for even till today. But if you're not able to zig and zag, you're almost guaranteed to sort of never make it to that destination. So I think while there's been a million mistakes, I'm always hesitant to say I wish I had known that earlier on. Some of the goodness comes out of making that mistake and then becoming who you are for it.
Yeah, who we are is based on the experiences that we have had. And if I can say one thing, you've built an incredible company and an incredible brand. For those people who aren't familiar with the 7 brand powers, I often think, and you can go look it up if you're not familiar with it, but I think Snyk has the brand for developer first security in the market. And Guy Po, you specifically, but you and the team have been responsible for building an incredible thing. If I may end with one question which you have asked everyone, so I'm going to ask it back to you, which is around AI. If you could use AI to automate one part of your job, I know that you've moved on now from Snyk, you're starting a new company, and I'm sure that you have a lot of stuff going on related to that. If you could use AI in one way related to your new company or your new role, what would that be? How would you use AI to make your life easier and better?
I think so. The company and the person are a little bit different. And I think the answer I got the most was really on sort of administrative aspect of life, which I think clearly I benefit from as well and would love to have more of. But I think really I would love AI to just sort of serve as a super extended memory of everything that happens. I don't know if this is old age or just sort of information overflow or a mix of the two, but I feel I get to meet amazing people through the journey, and some with notoriety and some the world doesn't know they're amazing yet, and have all these great conversations and learn. And a lot of the synthesis that comes out of that is really what kind of guides what I act on. And I feel like there's just so much that gets lost in the way. And so, I'm a note taker on meetings, and I try to sort of think about it. And again, I think like I'm decent at sort of synthesis, but I think really if I want to have a true sort of AI superpower, it would be around that. I have a lot of other sort of I'm very excited to see the future that AI brings in terms of personalization and dynamic content that adapts to our sort of context and our sort of reality at any time. But the tool I really most would want is something that can just remember for my own purpose everything that I've sort of seen and happened to me so that I can access it at any time.
I love that answer. Actually, if I think I would modify my answer to be the same as yours. We often forget the lessons that we've learned in the past. As much as we want to remember them, we often forget them and live through them. I mean, as a society and as a culture in general. But
yeah,
I love that answer.
And psychologists might sort of say that this is be careful what you wish for, because it's possible that like suppressing some trauma is sort of remembering the positive spin on something. But still, that's what I would wish for.
Yeah. Well, Guy Po, it's been fantastic to have you on the podcast and hearing the history of Snyk. Congratulations again on building an incredible company. And thank you to everyone for listening and tuning in. We hope to hear you again the next time on The Secure Developer.
Yeah. Thanks, Danny. And thanks for kind of taking on amazingly over here and, many of the things within the company. Yeah. And I'm excited to now sort of enjoy the creation, do a lot more, and supersede the original. So thank you.
Excellent. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We'll hear you and have you join next time on The Secure Developer. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to The Secure Developer, brought to you by Snyk. We hope this episode gave you new insights and strategies to help you champion security in your organization. If you like these conversations, please leave us a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and share the episode with fellow security leaders who might benefit from our discussions. We'd love to hear your recommendations for future guests, topics, or any feedback you might have to help us get better. Please contact us by connecting with us on LinkedIn under our Snyk account, or by emailing us at thesecuredev@snyk.io. That's it for now. I hope you join us for the next one.